Hello and welcome inside episode 16 of the Scully Scoop podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scully. Well, 16th episode, that's the charm, I guess, because we finally have a proper microphone. It came in the mail just a couple days ago. All the delays in the world with deliveries. It took some time, but it's finally here. So hopefully you guys can enjoy some better sounding audio here for upcoming podcasts. Well, today is Canada Day, a big day in our nation. And my guest this week covered one of the biggest events in recent Canadian sports history. Mark Rowe was on the scene for TSN when Bianca Andreescu won the U.S. Open back in September. Mark is my guest this week. We're going to discuss Bianca's victory and Mark's journey to TSN and so much more in this interview. Let's go to that right now. And we're pleased to welcome TSN anchor, reporter, radio host. The man does it all at the network, Mark Rowe. Mark, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Scully. I'm quite honored. This is, I hear, the hottest podcast that has come on the air, especially during the pandemic because, who starts a podcast during the pandemic? But good on you, man. I'm glad seeing you succeeding so much.
I appreciate that, man. I'll be sure to use that clip in my every promo I ever create. Most popular. Well, how has life during this quarantine period been for you?
It's been difficult, and I feel guilty saying that because so many people have it way worse than I do. I'm lucky to be healthy. The family's healthy and everything. But it's been tough. Definitely one of the busiest times of the year when I think of doing the World Hockey Championship and all, French Open, Wimbledon, the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, it's going nuts at SportsCenter, and all that just got, in the middle of March. I remember working at the Rudy Gobert night, as we now call it, and doing a show with Lindsay Hamilton and thinking in the back of my head, I don't know if I'm going to be in studio anytime soon. So it sucks not to be working the way we normally would. And, I went through a move during the pandemic, which I guess all things considered went okay, considering we have the house, but, there's a few headaches along the way. So, we're managing, and hopefully we continue to trend in the right direction.
Yeah, knock on wood. Hopefully we do. Now, I've seen you've been doing some overdrive this past week, and you've actually been in the building recently. What's it been like being back at TSN headquarters during this strange time?
It's so weird in the sense that, you know what it's like when you're there, doing Golf Talk Canada or That's Hockey, and you're walking the hallways and you're guaranteed to run into like 50 people that you kind of know, or you're like, oh crap, what's his name or what's their name and stuff like that. And you're just like, you give the nod or whatever. There's none of that. The only interaction I really have is with the cleaning staff, and they're very friendly, but they're outnumbering actual workers, at least in the kind of, we keep using the term bubble in the sports world, but in the TSN bubble of the building, because CTV News wants nothing to do with anyone like me in their section, because they're essentially quarantined over there. But
right.
So it's weird. It's a little quiet, and everything is set up clearly for people to eventually come back, because every workstation now has plexiglass. So if you're looking to your right and you're sneezing, it's going to come right back at you. So you better be ready for that.
Interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to whenever we can get back in the building. My last day was actually St. Paddy's Day, and I got the chance to actually host Golf Talk Canada television. This would have been the week after the Players' Championship was canceled. And because both Bob Weeks and Mark Zucchino were on location, they had to quarantine. So I was the only one allowed in studio. So I kind of got not big break, but somewhat of a break to host an hour of television by myself with them at home. So I guess, it's weird things happen with quarantine, right?
Yeah, that's our business, isn't it? It's getting an opportunity, and a lot of times they're weird opportunities that come out of nowhere. And then, someone like you knocks it out of the park, which you did, and now you're all over the place.
I appreciate the kind words. So during quarantine, there's been some fads going on, some different things. Have you avoided the quarantine 15?
I think so.
Good.
And I don't know. See, it's funny. my fiance is Italian, and I've had to live. I shouldn't say had to live. Like, they were very nice to allow me to spend a couple months in their house in Richmond Hill, and it's a good size house. But like, they cook, and her grandparents, who we've tried to keep our space with, will literally like drop off food. It's like the stereotypical Italian family.
Oh, yeah.
So I remember when I first started dating her, like, people were like, okay, get ready, because you're not going to be skinny anymore. And so we have like a little gym in the basement going with a treadmill. Maybe I'm just like so nervous that I'll let myself go that I've managed to keep the portions at a reasonable, but knock on wood, and the second time now we've said that in this episode, I've kept the COVID-19 off. And hopefully I can continue that after COVID's done. We'll see.
Oh, I believe in you. It's been funny watching guys on the PGA Tour. Gary Woodland losing 20 pounds. Bryson DeChambeau looks like a different human being. He's up 50 pounds since September.
Yeah. Protein powder by the barrel full, it looks like.
Like having 6 protein shakes per day. I'm no doctor, but I feel like that's not great for your digestive system.
I like a smoothie with some protein powder, like the next guy, but like I would get sick of it, and B, I'd be wondering, like, are you supposed to consume so much powder in one day?
Yeah, I don't think so. But hey, it's working for him. He's hitting some bombs out there, like Phil Mickelson, some nice bombs. But another fad during quarantine, cutting your own hair. It looks like you've got a nice high and tight going. Was that your fiance? Was that you? Was that a combination? Or did you go to get your hair cut? Because they're now open in Toronto.
It was my fiance, who has never cut hair before. She is a science and math teacher, so I don't think that's part of the qualifications at all. And she did a great job, way better than I could do on her hair. She's not letting me touch that. But I got to say, I was a little nervous the first time when she has the buzzer in one hand and her phone in the other, watching a video and going, okay, I think this is how you're supposed to. I'm like, stop doing that. Like, you're not like this, I'm going to flinch, and then you're going to like cut something, or I'm going to like we're going to have a buzz cut here. So it's funny. I have had a couple of compliments about it. It makes her very proud to hear that people think that I'm getting a normal haircut. So I don't know, maybe that's the routine moving forward, to save a couple dollars. Although I do like to support our barber, or local barber. So we'll see.
She can add that to the old resume. I've actually cut my hair 3 times myself, I got to say. So I haven't touched up top, but I've got quite a beard trimmer. And the first time I gave myself a pretty solid high and tight. The second time I got kind of cocky and went a little too high and tight and was sort of looking like I put a bowl on my head and just shaved everything around. And then the third time, I got to say, it was pretty good. So I may never see a barber again. I mean, I got to trim this somehow. One of the times I actually Googled where to find thinning shears for your hair up top. And probably a good thing I didn't find that, because as you said, I might have a buzz cut right now.
Yeah, that's true. It looks good, man. If you didn't tell me, as I kind of just look around here, you look the same like you were, in normal times working on That's Hockey. So nice job, buddy. It's way better than I could do.
Well, I appreciate that. So you mentioned That's Hockey. We've done a ton of work together on That's Hockey on Sports Center. There have been a ton of reruns during this quarantine period. I guess not so much recently, but maybe early on. Did you have a favorite rerun that you sat down and watched the entire thing, whether it was any of the Masters Rewind series or any of the hockey that's been shown?
Definitely watch some of the hockey. Anytime, like, say, like the 93 Leafs came on, like, that's when I first got into hockey, like the Doug Gilmour years, and watching just the style of play and how it's totally different. First off, more wide open in a way, but also like some of the hits you watch, you're like, oh my God, like that's a 5-game suspension right there. And like, no one's penalizing Wendell Clark for what he just did.
Yeah.
So watched a few of those games in the playoff series. I did catch the US Open from last year just because I was there, and I there's so much of that final match I didn't actually see because I was in the hallway ready to go out onto the court. And like the setup that the US Open has, like the whole grounds are first rate. And then you're in the small, tiny hallway with the I don't know, like a 20-inch TV in the corner of the hall. And really, you're just kind of like watching, the biggest sports moment for Canadian tennis. And you're like, yeah, I think, yeah, okay, yeah, she won. Like, it was weird. So it was cool to watch it again and just relive some of those moments and sort of the ebbs and flows of Bianca's match against Serena.
Well, you mentioned that Bianca match against Serena. We're going to get into that a little later because that was quite a highlight. Seeing Bianca win and seeing the way you covered that. We're going to get in that in just a little bit. But before we get into your career and some of the highlights, how did you get to TSN? Tell our listeners and viewers how you made your way to TSN.
So I started at 14, which may or may not be illegal for them to have a
Perfect.
Build. I wasn't getting paid, so I was like an intern. But the short answer is I was lucky to have an aunt that worked at TSN. She was one of the first employees from 1984. She worked until I think she left in like 99 or 2000, and I was probably like you, like a young kid who played sports, who always thought, I want this to be my full-time job. I don't know, how. And like, I wasn't, I was playing baseball and ski racing. I was just kind of getting into volleyball a bit, but I wasn't good enough. So it was like, well, my aunt has this cool job at TSN, which is, like so many my age, we woke up on sports desk to find out who won, which is crazy to think now. You had to wake up and find out. Yeah. So she one summer, she took me to work. She dropped me off at Off the Record with Michael Landsberg. My first day on the job, Jackie Chan was a guest on the show. No way. I didn't help out in the show whatsoever that day. Like, they were so welcoming and helpful. But if I think of like what I actually did, I just kind of like stood around and made sure I didn't get in the way. And I'll never forget like the green room. And you know what like Canadian television green rooms look like. Maybe a couple bottles of water, maybe a couple cookies. This had like full catering, every kind of drink you could think of. And Jackie had like an entourage of like 10 people. And the next day, I think we had like an offensive lineman from the Blue Bombers and a baseball umpire and maybe Rod Smith or someone on the show. And like, it went back to bottles of water and maybe like an old stale bun and and it was like, and everyone was like, no. Yesterday, that was like a one-off. We're never going to have a green room like that. So that was 1998. I started, and Michael and Bob Ackwitz was the producer at the time. They were always welcoming, and I would come in really whenever I could as a high school student, and I would intern and learn really what television was. That's, I had no idea what it took to put on a show, and it was great to get the experience. It was a huge help in terms of me getting into Ryerson University. And then I kind of went from there as a story editor after my first year of university. And then I took me a few years to finally get paid, and I actually had a paid job, I think in 2004. So and then it kind of continued on the trajectory of my career.
It's kind of funny, when people ask you or myself what we do, we essentially get paid to watch sports. I mean, some would say the dream job. It's awesome to do. But growing up for you, were there any broadcasters who you looked up to and idolized?
Well, I would say the first big influence was Michael, and part of that was he was one of the first broadcasters on TSN, and then I just got to know him, and it's fun. Like, maybe funny is not the right word, but when you're 14 and 15, you're so impressionable. So I kind of idolized Michael, and not in the sense of as a broadcaster, just in like the life that he had. Like, he had his own show, he's hosting it. He was out of there by 4:00. He had this, great family, nice house in Toronto. And then, years later, he reveals that he battles depression, and, he's had suicidal thoughts. And it was like, wow, like, if, I thought he had it made, like he had everything perfect. And, and I know he is grateful for the career that he's had, but it, in terms of a mental illness conversation, it can happen to anybody. So, but yeah, like guys like Michael, guys like, your guy, Gino Reda, Darren Detition, kind of Jim Van Horn, the kind of the originals on TSN. Those are, again, you're watching those anchors every single morning. And, when you're young, you make the mistake, like, I want to be just like them. And of course you learn, like, that's the biggest mistake you could ever make. And, there is only one Gino. We know that. There's only one Dutchie. We definitely know that. Never getting that big. Yeah, like, and that's, and you know this, like, that's the beauty of working at TSN. You're surrounded by so many talented people that you see, what does make Rod Smith successful, and what does, like, Dutchie do that has made him successful. It doesn't mean I have to go out there and have, Rod Smith's voice, because we know that's impossible. But what is his work ethic like, and how did he, you're a couple feet away from Gino. You can say, Gino, early on in your career, what did you do to get better? And did you do reps? Did you look in front of a mirror, or did you do a fake stand up in your backyard or whatever? And that's, you have to kind of use those resources to your benefit when you're in that building.
Well, you mentioned a couple of the guys there, Darren Tishin, Gino Retta. You obviously work alongside these guys now. And I mentioned before, you wear a lot of hats at TSN, SportsCenter anchor, That's Hockey host, reporter, Overdrive host. But for someone watching or listening to this, take us through a night in the life of Mark Rowe. Let's say if you're hosting the 10 o'clock SportsCenter.
Okay, yeah, because it's funny. I get that like all the time. Like, what's your routine or what's your regular schedule? And there really isn't one.
Yeah.
And I look at it as a great thing in our business, because for a couple of weeks you're working on the French Open or Wimbledon or U.S. Open. Your hours are all over the place. But if you're doing SportsCenter, I would say say it's the 10 o'clock. You're coming in right as that evening SportsCenter is happening, the 6 o'clock one. So somewhere in between 6 and 7. Obviously, you've done some work at home, and you never be totally prepared for a night on SportsCenter, because the story hasn't been written yet. You don't know who's going to win the game between the Habs and the Jets, or you don't know if LeBron is going to go off for 50 points and win in overtime. So you try to prepare, but as you come in at 7 o'clock or 6:30, and you check in with your producer, and at that time the producer's setting up a lineup, and you'll have a couple of on cameras that you write. And when I say on cam, it's really when it's a single shot and you're introducing a story that John Lou is doing on the Alouettes, or you're setting up a highlight pack that really needs you to kind of give the backstory on Kawhi going up against the Raptors for the first time in Toronto since deciding to leave as a free agent, that kind of stuff. So you work on that. And again, like you said, you're also getting paid to watch games, and you can't follow every game because there's so many going on, or at least in the good old days when we actually had sports. But you're trying to stay on top of things, because when you do get up on there at 10 o'clock and people are running you scripts, but sometimes you don't get a script, or sometimes the prompter goes down, or there's always a benefit to know what exactly happened in that game. And you might not know the video that's coming, but that Sidney Crosby went off for 2 goals and an assist and had the game-winning goal. And at least if someone gives you the wrong script, you can kind of read along and go, and there's Crosby, who had a huge game, and you can kind of play by play there in a bit. And some games you can do that, some games you can't. And right. So you would do the show, whether it's 90 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. It really varies by the night, and because of having 5 TSNs, you might be coming out of different programming, so you're syncing up with them, and then you're also talking to your co-hosts, and just you are always working on the chemistry that you have, whether it's Natasha or Lindsay or Kayla or usually it's Nachi and Jen, but sometimes I'll work with those two. And, just having conversations with them before the show, in a way, just kind of gets the juices flowing for when you're on camera.
Well, and there are some nights with you where you're hosting the 6, you're hosting the 10, you're on the air for 7 hours in a day. It's a marathon some days. But another thing I love asking on-air personalities about, and people ask me all the time, is what's it like having an earpiece? Because you're saying something and someone's saying something else, or counting you down in your ear. How awkward is it? How cool is it? What's the feeling like when someone's counting down or saying something in your ear?
Definitely takes some getting used to. And, and your initial reaction is to stop talking when you hear a producer or director give you a count or give you some direction. And it's obviously the worst thing you can do, because the viewer has no idea that that's happening and thinking, why is this idiot just like pausing here? Like, hello, there's some highlights. It's one of the challenges as a producer is knowing how little to talk, how much to talk, what's important, how do you get that message out. kind of in the fewest amount of words possible, so your on-air talent knows what you're saying but also isn't totally distracted by it. And and I started on air at CTV in Barrie, so I had like a 5 to 7 minute sportscast, and it was, and obviously I would hear from my director, but then I jumped into the NHL network, and we were on the air for like 2 to 3 hours live, no script. I've, like one of the shows is literally called NHL on the fly. Like I have no idea where we're going here. So that took a different skill set, and I needed probably half a season to really adjust to a producer saying, okay, we're going to, Hurricanes, Jets right now, for a live looking or for a highlight or for, whatever. And then like sometimes there was terminology and I wanted to on air go, I don't know what that means. and I likely have never said that, but afterwards I would say, because I remember I didn't know what layout meant, and I was like, what does layout mean? And it's like, shut up. That's what it means. It's like, okay, well, I know that now. So you're learning different styles and terminologies, but by now I like to think that I'm used to it, and being out in the field too, it's different as well, because you don't hear your piece sometimes as well as you would like to, and sometimes a message gets lost, and that's kind of why you see the reporter do the really corny, like, I'm here live in the middle of Times Square, and I can tell you it's almost midnight. Like, there's no secret. Here's how you do it, and you'll nail it in your first show or your first report live from a different location.
Well, you mentioned NHL Network there. I mentioned we've done work on that hockey. At this point, NHL training camps, July 10th, knock on wood again. Hopefully no more COVID cases. Who knows what's going to happen. What do you think of this format?
It seems like, as much as many have criticized the NHL for delaying so much of the information, and everyone wanted kind of what the NBA did, came out with dates. We've known for so long that it was going to be Orlando, wide world of sports. Still, as we're taping this, we don't know the two hubs. I have a pretty good bet that Vegas is going to be one, and probably Edmonton or Toronto, but still there's so many logistical issues here. I think in an imperfect world, the most ideal scenario is keeping everyone in a hub. And I look at what baseball is trying to do, and golf to a kind of an extent as well, being so tough. And how does everyone buy in and play by the rules? Like, you go to a grocery store and you think by now everyone knows to wear a mask, and you see people not wearing masks. And I don't want to, I don't think there's a malicious intent. It's just, it's ignorance, or you're forgetful or whatever. So how does a player, if the Jays say play in Toronto and the Yankees are in town, well, they're probably going to try to go to Yorkville for dinner, or they're probably going to try to go to patio, or they're going to try to like live a life that they want to live that sets them up for tomorrow's game. Like the athletes are all about routine. So to go back to the NHL, we've seen Toronto adjust their plan to take over Exhibition Place, and it would be sort of almost like an Olympic Village. That to me seems like the best scenario, or the best format that you can do it, because guys aren't going to be able to live in their hotel room for 10 hours a day. Like, it's just, they're going to go nuts, and guys are going to break rules. And I don't, outside of having like a police officer or a team official outside their hotel room, you kind of have to allow them to be adults. So that's, it's so important for the parameters of those hubs to be secure, because we don't know what the number, right now the numbers are going in the right direction in Ontario. They've been in a good place in Alberta, but we don't know what a month from now looks like. And if the numbers do spike in the middle of the playoffs, you can't just stop things in the middle of a playoff series. And you can't just stop things if one or two players test positive. So that, you have to, those imaginary kind of walls that you're building, they have to be, they have to be reasonable, but they also have to be, enforced by league officials. And it'll be, once we know the cities, we'll get a better idea of what the day-to-day of a player in the playoffs will look like, and where they can go. And, and if they can go to a movie theater or golf course. So it's it's fascinating to say the least. We wish we didn't have to do this. But hopefully it's a one-off, and we can look back and say, remember that time that half the league was in Edmonton and they all ate at the same Moxies and they ran into each other all the time. Like, it'll be kind of funny to be able to tell this story in the years to come.
You said it right there. I think that's the perfect word. Fascinating. It's really going to be fascinating to see what happens in the NHL, NBA, MLB, NFL. There's so many sports here. The fall could be pretty epic for the sports fan if everything can.
Let's hope. Yeah.
Yeah, let's hope. Stay optimistic. We're in conversation here with TSN's Mark Rowe. Mark, this is going to be released around Canada Day, this podcast, and you had a front row seat to one of the great moments in Canadian tennis history last September, seeing Bianca
and that is
Andreescu.
A professional segue right there, Scully. Very good.
I do my best, but you had a front row seat for Bianca Andreescu when she won the U.S. Open. Yeah. What was it like to cover history?
So cool. I know that's maybe the lame answer and a bit of an understatement, but to be there for 2 weeks and to see the whole journey. And, the cool thing about the U.S. Open is it's the one Grand Slam that allows broadcasters right onto the court and to interview them. So every, if you're a broadcaster from Australia and Nick Kyrgios wins, you're allowed out onto the court because he's Australian, obviously. For all the Canadians, after they win, we get to go right onto the court. I even look back at her first match, and she was on one of the smaller courts, and just being out there, and it's so intimate because there's about, 500 to 750 in terms of fans, and they're right over top of you, and she can hear what they're saying while you interview them. I can hear what they're saying, and in a way, I'm asking my questions, but I'm also kind of keeping my ear open to hear what a fan says, and you want to use that, and you want to say, what do you think about these fans who are calling you, the greatest of all time already? And she was, she embraced it so well. And I kept having to remind myself that she was 19 and to think of what we were like as 19-year-olds and how we would handle it. And, she was able to kind of balance the modesty that we almost expect from a Canadian athlete, but she had the killer instinct and almost, I want to use the word cockiness that you need in a way in an individual sport. Like one of the reasons why Tiger is so great in terms of golf is because he had that FU mentality that he was better than everyone. And I feel like Bianca has that in a way. And that's one of the reasons why she wasn't fazed by facing Serena Williams in front of 23,000 fans who, for the most part, wanted Serena to win. And she was able to maintain, her level of play over 2 weeks. The way that, if you watch the match, she was problem solving throughout that match. And, any, tennis analysts that we get to deal with, especially from ESPN, they marveled over that because it's one thing to be 19 and to have a really good serve or to have a good forehand. It's that mental aspect of the game that very few have at that stage of their career. And the fact that she showed that gave so much confidence to the experts who say she's not going to just win this U.S. Open. As long as she stays healthy, she's going to win multiple Grand Slams, and she's going to be in that kind of category of, Maria Sharapova and Steffi Graf, and maybe she gets to Serena Williams. It's crazy. You're talking about 23 Grand Slam titles. I don't want to, set the bar too high and to make it, she's only won one at this point. But it was crazy. And it was also great to see Canadian fans making the trip, but also international fans embrace her. And, I talked about Serena Williams and how, most of the crowd wanted to see her win. She's American. They wanted to see history, but in more matches than not, the fans were behind Bianca. And fans, whether it's golf or tennis, they root for the personalities and they root for a style of play. And I have so much admiration for Milos Raonic and for what he does. And he's a guy that on camera, off camera, always gives you the time of day, wants to talk about you. He'd want to talk about you, Scully, as a a 1 or 2 handicap, whatever your handicap is at right now.
It's 4.
Those kind of things. It's still way better than but his style of play, let's be frank, is boring. And he would probably be the first person to say that. And so, when Milos plays, Canadian fans will tune in and we'll watch him and we'll cheer him on. but I don't think there's a lot of general tennis fans out there saying Milos Raonic is my favorite tennis player. There's a lot of tennis fans who are saying Bianca Andreescu is my favorite player, and she's been on tour for a year, and so it's what she's been able to accomplish and what she's overcome already is just it's such an easy story to tell, and it made my job very easy. And I people came up to me and congratulated me after she won. I felt very uncomfortable with it, and it was kind of weird. Like I just went out and stuck a microphone in front of her, but it was cool. Like people see you representing Canada, and I guess I'll take that. And it was just to just have a front row seat to, as you said, history was something I'll never forget. And I kind of in a weird way have to thank Bianca for providing that for me.
Well, I remember watching all the coverage and especially once it got into the fourth round, I'd watch Bianca, and you were, quite frankly, just an all-star because, in tennis, as there's a match that starts after 7:00. It's no like 7:30 on the dot until they're in the semis and finals, that sort of thing. So, and I know you had some really long days at the US Open. What would a typical day be in terms of length at the US Open?
Yeah, and they're doing tennis, whether I'm in a studio in Scarborough or in New York for the U.S. Open, are by far my longest days. So in terms of New York, most people stay in Manhattan. We were staying in Manhattan, and so you take a shuttle bus. We were probably taking like an 8:30 in the morning shuttle bus. We arrive. I'm with my camera operator, and this past year I had Ryan Vardy and Owen Corbeld from Vancouver, and they were, you speak of all-stars, they're one man, doing lighting, doing audio, doing camera work. So we would arrive, we would tape maybe a couple of things that we could air throughout the day. And then we would set up our kind of mini studio, and we would be, on the air at 11:00. And, the nature of the beast is, we had like 4 different matches going on at the same time, especially early on in the tournament. So you're bouncing around, but also then you're trying to coordinate with an ESPN analyst and, whether it could be Patrick McEnroe or Brad Gilbert, and you're trying to coordinate with them. And then I'm trying to coordinate with Toronto, and I'm asking my boss, hey, can I run over to where ESPN is and do a quick hit for 50 minutes? And, they would say, okay, but you got to be back, because the Caroline Wozniacki match looks like it's going pretty quick, so you got to be back for that. And really, from the time you're on at 11:00, it's nonstop, and the days fly by, which is, I guess, a good thing, and you're enjoying it. And for the Canadians, like I said, we need to be on standby to go out on the court if they win. So, you think of, we have so many Canadian players now. So, I've had times where Shapovalov is over on grandstand. And then, 500 meters in the other direction, Vasek Pospisil is playing. And I'm trying to juggle, okay, which one is going to end up finishing first? And I've even had Vasek, who, again, he's one of the nicest guys on tour. He actually waited for me on a court. Like, I don't know too many players that would wait for me, because it was the year that Felix and Dennis played that match where Felix had to stop in the middle of the match because he was having heart issues,
right?
Like heart arrhythmia. So I sprinted over there. So anyways, it's all over the place. And then in the US Open, you have the primetime matches, and Bianca was playing in a lot of them. And then in the midst of all this, especially as Bianca was going on a run, I was doing radio hits, and sometimes the radio hits would start in my hotel room at 7 a.m. Jay and Dan, would want me. When Jay and Dan want you, you've really hit it big. So we try to do a double ender with them after Bianca played. CTV National or even CTV News would want you. We were doing CP24 hits throughout the day, which is, for our viewers outside of Toronto, it's the 24-hour news network in Toronto. So it was go. You try to find 15 minutes to eat something, but it's a lot of fun. Like I'm not. There's no complaint at all. This is why we got in the business, and you're running on adrenaline and then you get into position and you try to remember, what was that really smart question I was thinking of asking Bianca? And you're like, and sometimes you forget, and sometimes you roll with it, and it pops back into your mind. So it's by far my favorite time of the year. It's nothing beats it. You hear it all the time. If you can and you're in the New York area, go to the US Open, even if you're a very fringe tennis fan. the energy, the atmosphere, the places where you can get food and drinks. It's like it's like going to a golf tournament in a way. There are more things to do than just watching the tennis, but the tennis is pretty great. And if you can get a good seat, and most likely you can in some of the smaller courts, you get an appreciation of the sport, and you get appreciation of just how hard they hit the ball, and how, how quick their feet are, and how exhausting they probably, you can see them battling the 35-degree weather sometimes that you get in New York. So anyways, I kind of rambled there, but they're long days to make it short.
You mentioned appreciating it, and tennis is one of those sports that you seeing it live in person, you really get to appreciate that guy just ran around for 4 hours. The amount of cardiovascular skill you need and how hard they hit the ball. It's one of the great sports to see live, and I'm definitely adding that to my bucket list to go see the U.S. Open. Speaking of bucket list, another segue there. Mark, before we let you go, I've had a chance that I've had Kara Wagland on the podcast. I've had Lindsay Hamilton on the podcast. And I like to ask my guests about bucket list interviews. You've obviously interviewed Bianca Andreescu moments after winning the U.S. Open and making Canadian history. You interviewed Jarome Iginla earlier this week when he was named a nominee for the Hockey Hall of Fame. If you have a bucket list of athletes to interview or an athlete to interview, who would it be?
Ooh, I remember the first time that I interviewed Wayne Gretzky, and
the first time. Oh, there's multiple times.
Yeah. Well, and so the first time I was, I was just working on what we call the row. And the row is when you're watching SportsCenter, everyone in the background putting together highlight packs. And, I knew I wanted to be on air, and I would bug our assignment editors to put me out there. And so it was an exhibition game. I think it was Vesa Toskala's first game as a Maple Leaf.
Perfect.
That really successful tenure as a Maple Leaf goaltender. But Gretzky was the head coach of the Coyotes, and I remember waiting for him. And I remember Walter coming over to me and talking to me, and I was like, Walter Gretzky's talking to me. I don't understand why, but
pinch yourself, yeah.
Nice guy. And so Wayne came out, and Wayne was talking a lot with his hands, and it was a small little scrum, and he kept hitting my hand, and I was like, wow, Wayne Gretzky keeps hitting my hand. That's I got to interview him during the U.S. Open, and it was just one-on-one, and he was so good, and he was so happy to do it, and he gave such a great interview. In the way that he broke down Bianca's game and what it was like as a hockey player to watch it. And he's also he's ridiculously modest. And it's almost like he would say, when you're thinking of the greats, like Muhammad Ali or Gordie Howe. And I'm like, Wayne, you can say yourself, like no one will call you an arrogant, a-hole by saying you're the best. Like, look at the stats. Anyways. And then when we were done, he wouldn't leave us. Like, he just kept wanting to talk. And other people we were in one of the ESPN suites. So other people want to come over and say, hey, Wayne, your third cousin's my best friend. And Wayne's like, oh, it's great. And then he kept coming back to us and was like, this is such a great story. Like, how great is it? And he kept wanting to talk, which is the coolest thing ever. But also I was like, I got to go. My executive producer, Sam Cicerello, is going to lose his if I'm not in this spot in 5 minutes. But how do you tell Wayne to shut up? And so that more recent interview with Wayne Gretzky will stick with me. You mentioned Bianca. That was really, that was cool. And I remember doing a sit down with Sidney Crosby when they were playing ball hockey in Calgary to get ready for the Olympics. Remember that when they didn't allow them?
That was awesome.
And this is kind of weird and maybe even creepy, but during the interview, I got really fixated on how big his thighs were and how he could barely fit into a chair. And I'm like, it's ridiculous. So that's really cool. The Wayne Gretzky one sticks out, and I'll just quickly point out getting to go out to the ice when the 1 year during the NHL Network I got to go to the Stanley Cup Final was 2015, and we were one of the first networks to go out. It was CBC and it was NBC and it was us. So I was right on the ice when doing the interviews and interviewing Taves and Joe Quenneville, and that there isn't one necessarily interview that I'll remember the most. They were all great and they're all obviously super happy and the party's happening around you. But that was the year the Stanley Cup was late.
Oh yeah.
And I was literally 6 feet away from Gary Bettman. and he was, as you can imagine, losing his you-know-what and yelling like, where the hell is it? And then I remember seeing Patrick Kane skate around and was like, bring out the cup, where's the cup? And there was a torrential rainstorm and like they got rerouted. And anyways, it was like one of those weird things of like, how did they not avoid this? But anyways, everyone from the NHL was like yelling at everybody, including myself. I'm working for the league's network. And they're like, why are you standing there? You need to stand over there. I'm like, well, like Larry over here told me to stand. Like, I was like, what do you want? Like, and I later found out just everyone was pissed off because the cup wasn't there. It had nothing to do with what I was doing. So that isn't one interview, but I'll always remember that. So yeah, I look back at it and think very lucky to be able to name off all those situations.
Well, Mark, you've told some great stories today. You've had a great career thus far, and I'm looking forward to seeing you sometime, hopefully soon, whether we're in studio or maybe on the golf course. Mark, thanks so much for your time today, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, golf lessons, actually. I'll take some golf lessons from you. But no, I appreciate it, Scully. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, wow! In your life, have you seen anything like that?
Really appreciate Mark Rowe taking the time with me today. Some great stories, interviewing Wayne Gretzky a couple of times. And of course, Bianca Andreescu winning the US Open. He was there. He was an all-star covering that event throughout the 2 weeks of the US Open last September. So thanks again to Mark for joining the podcast. And Mark, hopefully I get to see you soon. We'll get a round of golfing, or maybe we'll be in the TSN building in the not too distant future. Well, thank you for listening and watching to this podcast. Don't forget, subscribe to us on iTunes and watch and subscribe on YouTube. Really appreciate all the support I've gotten so far and looking forward to bringing you so many more episodes. This has been another fun edition of the Scully Scoop podcast, and we'll see you next time.